Ever heard of the fabled Atlantis? Picture it, a mystical realm beneath the sea, home to an ultra-advanced society. Now, let's be real. As of 2023, we're not entirely sure what's lurking beneath the waves. Only a fraction of the ocean's vastness has been charted. To give you a number, roughly 5% of the ocean has been directly explored, and a mere 24.9% of the seafloor has been mapped using high-res tech. That leaves the lion's share of the ocean shrouded in mystery, vast and uncharted. But let's dive into the stories, the Hollywood tales of this city that sank into the depths. Today, I aim to lead you deeper, to uncover the origins of this underwater land. Where was it? Why did it vanish? Who were the Atlanteans? Welcome to the Enigma of mythological Atlantis. The myth starts with its first mention by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BC. In these dialogues, a character named Critias, Plato's uncle, recounts a story he heard from his great-grandfather, Drapides, who heard it from the Egyptian traveler Solon, who visited Egypt around 580 BC and learned of Atlantis from an Egyptian priest. The priest claimed the events happened around 9,000 years prior, so roughly 9,500 BC. Here's where we hit our first snag. While scholars agree Solon did visit Egypt, the tale of Athenian Greeks at war with Atlanteans seems far-fetched. After all, in 9,500 BC, Athens didn't exist. Most agree this period predates agriculture and permanent settlements in the region. Plato's account of the war between ancient Greeks and Atlanteans begins with a grand conflict between peoples living on either side of the Pillars of Hercules, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato makes it clear that although Atlantis wasn't connected to the Greeks, they were given Greek names in his narrative for clarity. The history of Atlantis begins with the gods dividing the earth, building temples for worship and sacrifices. Within Poseidon's domain was the island of Atlantis, larger than Libya or Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. On this island was a fertile plain, and near the center of the plain was a small mountain. The original inhabitants, born from the earth, were named Evenir and his wife, Lusip, and their daughter, Clydo. When Clydo came of age and her parents died, Poseidon, noticing her alone on the island, fell in love. If you've seen my video on Poseidon, it might not surprise you that Clydo didn't reciprocate Poseidon's feelings. To protect her from outsiders, he created 2 rings of land around the original mountain and plain with water in between. He also created a hot and cold spring in the center of the island, ensuring every type of food and animal the inhabitants could desire was available. Poseidon and Clydo had 10 demigod sons, 5 sets of twins, and divided Atlantis into 10 parts among them. The firstborn of the first twins was made king, ruling the largest and finest part at the island's center. The others were made princes, each ruling over vast areas of the island and many people. The eldest twin and king was named Atlas, and the surrounding ocean was named the Atlantic after him. The name Atlantis itself means Island of Atlas. There's some debate about the island's name, with some suggesting it means daughter of Atlas, as Atlantis is the feminine form of Atlas. However, it was customary to name islands in the feminine form, not necessarily implying daughter of Atlas. With each generation after Atlas, the eldest son was chosen to rule the kingdom. The island enjoyed prosperity and peace, with citizens never hungry or afraid. Laws set by Poseidon ensured no prince or king could take up arms against one another. At the island center was a column inscribed with the kingdom's laws and an oath cursing anyone who wouldn't follow them. Plato describes Atlantis as rich in a valuable metal called orichalcum, with no mystical properties, only that it was valuable, second only to gold. As time passed, the Atlantean Empire grew. The sons of Poseidon and their descendants lived and ruled over various islands and controlled areas up to Egypt and what's now Italy, within the Pillars of Hercules. Each generation built on the previous, adding the finest temples, walls, bridges, and canals. But with each age, the divine bloodline diluted, and the rulers became more human. Externally, Atlantis' future seemed bright with even more prosperity expected. But internally, human vices like greed and misuse of power began to grow. It was this greed that brought them to the gates of Athens, where a war began. Unfortunately, the end of Plato's second dialogue is missing, but in the first dialogue there's a summary of what happened to Atlantis. It involves Zeus noticing the greed and corruption of Atlantis' kings and calling a meeting with other Olympian gods to discuss what to do about them. The climax of the story is Zeus striking Atlantis with a giant earthquake, sinking the entire island in a single night. At the heart of Plato's narrative is a stark warning. Even the most prosperous societies can crumble if they succumb to greed, hubris, and the abandonment of justice. This cautionary message is contrasted against the Athenians, whom Plato idealizes as embodying a simpler, more virtuous way of life. Through the contrast between the doomed Atlantis and the idealized Athens, Plato invites his audience to consider that true greatness is found not in material wealth or military power, but in the commitment to justice and the cultivation of a harmonious community. While some consider Atlantis a literal depiction of a historic city, Plato's fictional world-building is nothing new. It's not the first time he's been the architect of fictional worlds, each serving as a stage for his philosophical explorations. In The Republic, Plato sketches the blueprint for an ideal city to discuss justice, governance, and individual roles within society. Similarly, The Laws presents a second-best city, diving into laws, order, and divine retribution. The story of Atlantis becomes even more fascinating because it may be based on real events. It could be referring to the volcanic eruption of Thera, a huge disaster that Plato and his contemporaries would have known about. The massive Minoan volcanic eruption devastated the area, and modern estimations suggest it could have been felt as far away as China, with some records talking about crop failures and an unusually cold July. Plato's use of real-life events makes the story of Atlantis feel more believable and helps to highlight the deeper philosophical ideas he's exploring by connecting them to actual history. Plato used Atlantis to show that being rich and powerful doesn't mean you're doing things right. To him, a great society was one that valued wisdom, justice, and working together for the common good. He thought that losing sight of these values, like Atlantis, could lead to disaster. Let's start with an obvious but important point. Plato was a philosopher, not a historian. His story of Atlantis is intriguing, but filled with uncertainties and missing pieces that have left people guessing for years. One big issue is that there's no evidence outside of Plato's stories to back up his claims, especially the ancient Egyptian records he says the story came from, as discussed earlier. The timeline he suggests, with Athens and Atlantis battling it out, doesn't add up. 9,000 years before Solon visited, Egypt was a stone age where inhabitants didn't recognize the land as Greece, let alone there being the city of Athens. Plus, Plato talks about a barrier made of silted mud, making it impossible to travel to the Atlantic Ocean after Atlantis sank. But there's no record of such a barrier. So it seems Plato was mixing fiction with deeper philosophical ideas, using the story more as a way to think about big questions than to give an accurate historical report. The story of Atlantis, first told by Plato, has changed quite a bit in new versions, with each change reflecting what people today are worried about or interested in. The first change is that originally, Plato described Atlantis as a powerful nation that tried to take over the world but fell because of its greed and arrogance. But modern stories often skip this aggressive part, choosing instead to focus on them becoming too decadent. The second most common change is that Atlantis wasn't sunk because of angering the gods, but that Atlantis destroyed itself by misusing its advanced technology. This fits in with current worries about how technology might cause our downfall. Also, the metal orichalcum, which Plato mentioned as a sign of Atlantis' riches, is often seen in stories as having magical or superhuman tech qualities, but orichalcum was simply a valuable metal worth more than silver and less than gold. The only time it was described as being used for building anything was to plate the inner wall of Atlantis because it was luxurious. The biggest change from the original and the root of many films, books, and conspiracy theories is that after the island sank, the residents survived. Not only did they survive, but they thrived, creating a world where the residents lived together with the creatures of the deep, keeping their advanced technology away from the hands of the rest of humanity. These new takes on the Atlantis myth show how old stories get updated to reflect what each generation hopes for, fears, and values. They turn Atlantis from a warning about a doomed civilization into a symbol of mystery, the promise of technology, and even hope for a better way to live with our planet. People have been searching for Atlantis since Plato wrote about it. He wrote that Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Despite this, no one has found any solid proof of Atlantis, but it hasn't stopped people from trying. A popular idea is that Atlantis might be the Rikat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania. This huge circular pattern in the desert, which can be seen from space, was once thought to be a crater, but is actually the result of natural geological processes from about 100 million years ago. Its distinctive look has made some people wonder if it's the real Atlantis, especially because it looks very much like Plato's descriptions. But most academics don't believe this to be the case. Doggerland is another place that gets compared to Atlantis. It was a real land bridge connecting Britain to Europe that gradually submerged up to the Ice Age. Then an underwater landslide triggered a catastrophic flooding, the remaining Doggerland landmass. Unlike the speculative idea of the Sahara being Atlantis, there's actual evidence that Doggerland was inhabited. Fishing boats in the region often pull up ancient tools from the Neolithic and Mesolithic eras from the bottom of the sea. In this area, archaeologists have discovered bones from Neanderthals and mammoths, and well-preserved human footprints in a petrified forest that has recently become visible along the current coastline. Essentially, what we now call the UK was once just the tallest peaks of this ancient land, and the whole North Sea area was once a lush woodland haven dating back to the Mesolithic period. In short, while the Rikat structure, Doggerland, and theories like it are intriguing, they haven't proven Atlantis was real. So, was Atlantis real? Are Atlanteans among us today? Or is it just a tale to teach us about the human condition and the dangers of hubris? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Learn more about the mysteries of mythology in the next videos.